Well, good afternoon and welcome. It's important for us to remember as we gather again together here today where we've been. We're going to continue reading here in Job, and it's going to be pretty easy to get confused about what it is about what is pleasing to God and what is essentially heresy as we work our way through. You see, God has given the devil permission to take from Job all of his earthly blessings, including his children. Job's not aware of those conversations between the devil and God, so he doesn't really understand why God's favor seems to have been withdrawn from him. The devil didn't take Job's wife. Actually, he has another plan for Job's wife. He's going to use her instead to encourage Job to curse God, which she does. Even Job's health has been taken from him now by the devil. But Job is refusing to curse God. Instead, he actually cursed himself yesterday and the day that he was born, but he still has not cursed God. Three friends of Job come to comfort him, and they're very much taken aback by the Job that they see. It's not the Job that they remember at all. They don't even speak for 7 days. It's important to remember when they do speak, and this is what I was mentioning earlier. It's important to remember when they do speak that they often express profound truths, wonderful things, give glorious praise to God. But their theology is deeply flawed because they're operating from the premise that if you sin, you will suffer, and if you do not sin, you will prosper. Therefore, those who suffer must have sinned and deserve it. That is not correct theology at all. As you read what Eliphaz, or as you read what Eliphaz and Bildad say, we need to do, and actually then the other friends as well, we need to watch for places where they insist that Job should confess his sins and that God will then restore him and reward him. That's patently against the truth. It's not how God acts, and it's completely out of sync with what's actually going on in Job's life. Job is suffering actually precisely because he is upright and just. Not perfect, mind you, but upright and just before God. So Job is right to insist that he has nothing to confess, and he would actually destroy his own integrity if he were to fabricate a confession. So as we begin our reading today in chapter 6, we find Job responding to Eliphaz, and he tells Eliphaz that his complaint is just, that Job's complaint is indeed just. I mean, effectively what he's telling Eliphaz is, look, you don't understand, which really is quite correct. Job feels that God has become his enemy, and he asks God to just take him now and end his tremendous suffering before he breaks. I mean, that's the last thing that Job wants to do, is to break and to lose his faith or his trust in God. Job realizes that there is nothing inside of him that can help him. But still, Job does not curse God or contemplate taking his own life. In chapter 7, we're going to see Job turn his complaint from his friends to God. When Job does this, he uses a fascinating illustration. He says, as a slave longs for the evening sun so that he can stop working, and a worker for his wages at the end of the day, so Job would long for sleep. But even then, he doesn't get any rest. His nights are sleepless and restless. When Job speaks of Sheol in this chapter, he's speaking of the place of the dead. Whether they're righteous or evil, it's just a place where the dead are. Later, Job will speak, actually much the same way that we might speak of a cemetery or something like that. Later, Job will speak of the hope that he has through faith in God, the beautiful hope that Job expresses. But that's not his point right now. His point, what he wants to convey, is simply that once you die, you are no more, at least with respect to those who are there on earth. Job then questions why he has become a burden to God. He asks God, why have I become a burden to you? He acknowledges his sinfulness and he pleads for mercy. But while his friends are speaking of a specific sin that has surely caused Job suffering, Job here speaks of his general sinfulness, and he continues to maintain his integrity, which is indeed correct. In chapter 8, then, Bildad all but jumps all over Job for what he has just said. He more or less is calling Job he's calling him a windbag, essentially. Bildad defends the integrity and the justice of God, which is correct. But then he maintains that God saves only the pure. And he again insists that Job must have done something wrong, and that's why he's suffering. And that if he would just make a confession, that everything would go away. Bildad goes on on this way for a while, but he ends in verse 20 by summarizing his philosophy, essentially saying that God will not reject a blameless man, nor take the hand of evildoers. We're going to see that in chapter 9, that Job immediately recognizes the error of Bildad's theology, that since sin produces suffering, it must follow that someone who is suffering has sinned. Job recognizes that that's a hollow, a pointless theology. Bildad's comfort and advice then essentially becomes even less helpful than that of Eliphaz. In chapter 9, which is our last chapter for our reading today, Job calls for an arbiter, an intermediary. He agrees that God does not pervert justice, and he also understands that he himself is incapable of pleading his case before God. Actually, prophetically, he notes that his own mouth would condemn him. So in the midst of this, Job notes again that to him, his suffering seems, disproportionate to his offense, whatever that might be. Ultimately, Job recognizes that he has no hope of fixing his problem with God on his own, that someone else will need to step in. Now, we of course know that someone else to be Jesus Christ. He's our mediator with God. He suffered for us. He reconciled us to the Father. When we return tomorrow, Job will continue his plea to God. We'll hear from a third person named Zophar, and then we'll begin to hear Job's reply to Zophar. May God be with you and bless you. I look forward to gathering with you again tomorrow as we continue our reading together.